I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Today is Thursday, January 12th, 2023. We've been modifying, updating, rebranding, repurposing the show, The Conversation. My thanks to Vash Bodhi and to Yasmin Hayes, who are leading the reconstruction, the rebirth, and the relaunch of The Conversation. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm learning as I'm doing. I hope that you will be part of this journey towards building a community of people that talk, that share, that dream, that critique, and that take action, that motivate action between us, among us, and in the world. Action that leads to, I think, ways that we each individually and therefore collectively bring our best selves to each other and to the world, ways that ultimately mean that we have intentional impact on creating a cosmos, a universe, a country, a neighborhood that reflects our dignity, our humanity, and our concern for each other and our concern for the future. Well, today I have the great pleasure to bringing a new companion friend to the program. He's going to be joining our regular leader, brother, Ndugu Yusuf Mjini, and me. This will be Reggie Taylor. He's a professional writer and artist. He has also hands-on experience with a lot of major national publications. He's covered high freelance PR assignments in New York City. He's an experienced political aide, a married father of four, a sculptor, a broadcast advertising jingle writer, a published poet. His accolades include being an artist with a lot of social commentary that is more than art for art's sake. He has competed in the World Trade Center Site Memorial Competition in 2003 and earned a citation for that work. There's more that we can say about him, but I'll let him say it himself. We'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. Let me say this to you, listeners. Thank you for tuning in. And what I want anybody that's checking it out right now to do is send a note to people in your address book or friends or people who you are messenger partners with or Facebook partners with. Let them know that we're here, that we're live, and that we're building community. And our particular mission is to focus on the YouTube presentation or platform. You might be joining us right now through Black Press USA YouTube, through the Insight News YouTube channel. You could be connecting with us through Twitter, through Facebook, through LinkedIn, and we appreciate that. We're glad that you're connecting wherever you are. But we're asking a favor. I'm asking a favor. I'd like for you to, before this program is over, go to YouTube and subscribe to the channel. We've got around 200 or so subscribers on our YouTube channel. We want to build that to 1,000, and we want to build it quickly. And you can help me do that simply by you becoming a subscriber. It doesn't cost anything. It gets you connected to the notices and helps the two of us together, all of us together, to begin building this community that I think is going to be phenomenal, useful, practical, and connecting, and I say even healing. When we can hear ourselves and share ourselves, we can heal ourselves. I believe that. So go to YouTube, Insight News, subscribe, and ask everybody you know, to join you and me in a conversation every day. We're here 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 1 o'clock Central Time. We want you to be a part of this experience. We're starting the program off every day now. This is thanks to the direction from Yasmin, and kudos to Yasmin again, with what we're calling our hot topics. And over the course of this program, we're going to be talking about several things, among them Title 42 and the Biden administration's approach to the migration crisis at the southern border. That's one thing. We also want to talk about the Biden administration's policy to address soot pollution. According to a New York Times article, the new rule, one being presented for the first time in a decade, will reduce emissions of soot. And the problem is, the news we need to focus on is that the soot disproportionately harms communities of color. So let's talk about that. Also want to talk, speaking of national, international, about our government's commitment to provide $55 billion to Africa over the next 3 years. Sounds like a lot, but is it? And what's it going to do? So we'll discuss that as a course in the course of this program. And finally, well, two more things. I'm interested in how we feel about McCarthy finally becoming the Speaker of the House. Does he have more power, less power? Let's talk about the process of how he ended up after 15, I think 14 rounds, becoming the Speaker, and what it means for his leadership, what it means for the Biden administration, what it means for us, our people in the community. The last thing, which would be the first thing that we talk about in the program, is Brazil. We've done several stories over the past months about the emergence of Ignacio Lula da Silva, his candidacy, his successful candidacy to become the first, or to become president for the second time of Brazil. But the first associated with that was his selection of a vice president who is a woman, an Afro-descendant woman as well. What's happening right now in Brazil is some challenges to the election and to the installation of Lula by people that were supporting the outgoing president, Jair Bolsonaro. Yogi Sena is with us from Bahia. We'll talk about Brazil in just a minute. Well, those are the hot topics, kind of gives you the landscape for today's program. And let me jump right in and first of all, bring in Yogi Sena from Bahia. Yogi, you heard the introduction. Brother, good to see you and Happy New Year to you. Have you? Yeah, good to see you, man. How you doing? Yogi, talk about Brazil. Tell us, give us the update on Brazil.
Lá de fora. Okay. Thank you for
I
having me.
need
Happy
you to
New
move
Year
your
to
camera on
everybody.
your face better.
And I'm here in the central square of the historic district of Bahia. I just returned from the festival of Bonfim, our Lord of the Good End.
Yogi, if you
And
can
so
wait,
Brazil.
Yogi, if you can wait a minute, no, Yogi, if you can wait a minute, I need you to be looking straight into the camera. Right now, we're getting a picture of your ear, so I need your face. So go ahead. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
All right. So, yeah, I'm here broadcasting from the Pelourinho, from the historic district of Salvador. I just came back from a festival of Bonfim, that our Lord of the Good End. That's also a traditional black festival. So we are in Bahia today, and funnily on this festival uh, that was around the Catholic Church, the priest did a prayer, and he vehemently um, uh, rejected all the turmoil that we are living here and remind everybody to be a Christian in a certain way. So Bolsonaro and his acolytes last Sunday, they tried to invade the Congress of Brazil, and not only the Congress, that when people are comparing to the US, uh, his mob invaded simultaneously the, the, the Congress, the palace of the president, and the Supreme Court. And we saw very bizarre scenes of these people who, until then, said that they are about God, family, and the country and the fatherland, as we call it here, patria. And one of the scenes that we found that was broadcast live is one of those people were defecating inside of the chamber of the Supreme Court. So that has caused a really big commotion here in Brazil. Only but three, all but three uh, representatives try to express some sort of support to the rebellion. Actually, they are being called here as terrorists, and in certain way, it's gonna mark a turning point on the politics, because Until then, when Lula assumed, and also I would like to um, just add that is the third term of Lula, not the second time. It's
Okay,
the
thank
first
you.
time
Mhm.
that a president in the history of Brazil has been elected three times through democratic means. And it's very significant because who Lula is and what he represents. He does represent the average Brazilian Joe, the average person. He is a former union leader that, again, for the third time, he's achieved to be elected president of Brazil. And he is the only president that does not belong to the elite of Brazil. So, going back to the insurrection, that insurrection has caused a big commotion in Brazil, and people now kind of really clear which side they got to be, because those terrorists they are not about country, they're not about God, and they're not about family. They are really vandals. Many of those people were paid to be there and breaking everything, and the Brazilian government, along with the judiciary and the Congress, are going after these people with all what they have. So, as I say in the beginning, Lula came with an attitude of kind of conciliation, and try to put behind the polarization that was in the society. But with this insurrection, there is no more niceness. So the government is going after them with everything. So, for example, the former Minister of Justice of the government that just left has been indicted, and he's been on the red list of the Interpol because he also did run away to the U.S. So
Yoji, let me stop you there. I'm going to say thank you, first of all, for that update. I'm going to bring my other guest in, and I'm sad that we don't have our technology working so that you can hear me. But thank you so much for that report. And let me bring in both you, Seth, and uh, uh, my new guest, Brother Reggie. Gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon, and thank you again for being here. Jump in. What are your impressions when you watch what's happening in Brazil and think about what happened on January 6th here in the U.S.? Youssef, what comes to mind? Reggie, let's go to you, Reg. What comes to mind with you?
Sure.
First of all, welcome, man. Let me have you take a minute to talk about who you are, first of all.
I'm a happily married father of four. That's my claim to fame. That's my it's my greatest accomplishment. I'm a professional writer. I have more than 20 years of writing experience. I have worked for several different newspapers in various cities. I'm based in the Baltimore, Washington corridor, primarily writing opinion and editorial pieces for newspapers. I've previously been a writer recently for the Urban League in Cincinnati. I work as a branding and marketing consultant. I'm a sculptor. I'm currently in discussion with the city of New York with Community Board 10 that represents Harlem about developing a sculpture for Harlem to commemorate Cad Calloway, who most of us will find out shortly during Black History Month is responsible for New York City coming to be known worldwide as the Big Apple. I enjoy my family. That's my biggest enjoyment. And some of my writing has earned me citations in the U.S. Congressional Record and accolades from different nonprofit organizations I've contributed my time to.
Well, welcome to the conversation. Let me have you jump right in then. We're talking about January 6th, the insurrection in Brazil. Our colleague and editor, actually from South America, Yoji Sena, gave us an update. How do you see the connection between what happened there and what happened January 6th, 2 years ago here in the U.S.?
Well, the playbook is clear. I mean, Bolsonaro took a page out of Donald Trump's playbook, as a lot of right-wing politicians around the world have done. And I think it relates directly to his visit to the United States prior to the inauguration of Da Silva. I don't think he wanted to be in the country once Da Silva assumed authority of the country, because he may have faced the same fate as Donald Trump has in the United States. My understanding is that he was just released from the hospital 2 days ago, and that he's still in Florida. He's still in Orlando and has not left to go back to Brazil. I think he doesn't want to face the music when he gets there.
Brother Yusuf, how you doing, man?
Very good, thank you. Good afternoon to both of you. When Bolsonaro came to the United States, he met with Steve Bannon before he met with Donald Trump. And they encouraged him to oppose the election and to make every attempt to try and overturn it, which is what we've seen in the news all week. And it's not only a copy out of the playbook, it's an exact copy of the January 6th insurrection, which occurred here a year ago.
Let's shift the focus a little bit to the Biden policy. Speaking of international national issues, we've got an article from CNN that says the Biden administration keeps shifting its stance on a controversial policy. The policy is referring to Title 42. And the CNN article said Joe Biden just made a point that's surprising to those who've been closely following the administration's approach to immigration at the southern border. Biden said he didn't like Title 42, and the article says that was startling because it came minutes after his administration announced a program that effectively expands the controversial public health restrictions yet again. Yusuf, talk about what Title 42 is and generally what our concerns have been and should be about immigration policy in this country.
Well, we have to go back to 1965 and 1966, Al, because at that point in time, 80% of the slots, pardon me, for people immigrating to the United States were reserved for white people from Europe, from England, from Sweden, from France, from European countries. And after the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, Lyndon Johnson was successful in getting the Immigration Naturalization Reform Act passed, which allowed for proportional immigration from countries throughout the world. And thus, we've seen Southeast Asians, Vietnamese, Cambodians, Hmong, we've seen Africans, we've seen people entering the United States from Central, South, and Latin America who formerly were under this quota rule and were capped at 20%, essentially people of color, of those being allowed to immigrate to the United States. Now, Title 42 was implemented during the Trump administration, and it in effect says that because of COVID, they can turn people away at the border without even giving them a hearing to determine whether they have justified cause for seeking asylum or refuge within the United States. And what President Biden hopes to do is to allow 30,000 per month. There have been 2.5 million in the past year, if that's any indication of how much they want to scale back immigration from Central, South, and Latin America coming into the United States.
So Yusuf, you're saying that there have been, out of that region, 2.5 million?
Correct.
And then the question becomes, and you brought it up, how many of those would you identify as Afro-descendant or people of color? And how does that question play in? We know that what you described earlier was about the propensity or the preference of our national policy historically to favor and to invite Europeans and to resist people of color. What does this play out like in this situation?
Well, we're talking about Spanish-speaking people. We're talking about many people of mixed heritage, Spanish, indigenous, Afro-American. If you we talked about Brazil alone, where 60-70% of the population are Afro-Brazilians. So significant numbers of people of color. When you look at Venezuela, when you look at Guatemala, And interestingly enough, the quota does not involve people from Mexico. And, but the Biden administration does recognize the importance of this issue politically, of the forthcoming election, and recognizes that they have to do something because building the wall was a significantly favorable position for the Trump administration throughout his presidency, and it was one of the priorities on which Donald Trump campaigned back in 2016. So immigration is going to be a hotbed issue. When you look at the red states, you're looking at primarily those states along the southern border, along with those in the southeast part of the country. So it's going to continue to be a hot political issue there, and it will have an impact on local, state, and national elections in the future.
Reggie, what do you think are the political implications? How do politics play in from where you stand as a journalist and communicator?
Well, they absolutely are. Well, first of all, Title 42 was just a bogus policy in the first place because Donald Trump made it clear that he didn't want people coming from S-hole countries in South Central America, Africa, and the Caribbean in the first place. The whole idea
you can say the word if you want to. It's fine.
So that was a bogus idea. Just, and to refer to the inscription at the base of the Statue of Liberty, "Bring me your tired and poor." Donald Trump very overtly said, "I don't want your tired and poor. I want your white and rich." I mean, that's a quote. So the whole idea of Title 42 is bogus in the first place. And our current president and Biden understands he has to do something. COVID is on the increase, RSV is on the increase, influenza is on the increase. So that gives him cover to be able to continue the policy when in reality he really doesn't have one of his own to take the place of Title 42. So it's a very political situation. He can't be caught flat-footed in the next election having done nothing about immigration over the border. And the idea that Mexico, this policy doesn't apply to Mexico, that was part of the deal that was struck because Mexico is the way station. Mexico is the holding pen for all those folks from Central and South America trying to get into the States. That's their last country before they reach our border. So they don't want to offend Mexico by applying the same policy to the Mexicans.
Interestingly enough, more people have been deported under the Biden administration under 42 than were deported under the Trump administration.
Correct.
And this policy continues 42 because the battle is ongoing in the courts on whether it can be stricken or whether it has to remain in place.
One thing I want us to talk about maybe in the future, not now, but I want to have some way of looking at what's happening in Europe with, I think, the Europeans deciding and creating a relationship with a Central African country for the deportation of immigrants seeking asylum in various European countries. Won't do it today, but put that on your notebooks for a future discussion. And the idea is to create parallel, to draw distinctions or lines of connection between the philosophy, the practice, and the power equations associated with how Europeans are dealing with the influx of Africans in particular, people of color in general, and how this country is dealing with the increased presence of Black and brown people coming through the southern border and beyond. Because there must be similarities and parallels, and there must be a perception of a common fear, a common angst in the realm of European power. We should look at that at some point in time. But now let me shift to, we're on DC. Kevin McCarthy made Speaker of the House after 14 ballots?
16.
16. Did he really gain any power? That's the title of an article that was published, I think, earlier this week, maybe today, actually. And the article talks about McCarthy banging the gavel for the first time after being elected next speaker after a 15th round of voting and on the fourth day of the 118th Congress at the U.S. Capitol. What does it mean? Let's talk about that process. Seth, you start, and then Brother Reggie, jump in.
Yeah, briefly, McCarthy is a clear Trump supporter and ally. So we can look for a continuation of the Trump policies in the House of Representatives under McCarthy's leadership, number one. Number two, it wasn't simply that they voted, it took 16 times for them to vote and give McCarthy the majority necessary to be elected. He had to make compromises after each failed vote to try and win over reluctant Republicans, particularly those from the Freedom Caucus, which is an extreme right-wing caucus of 20 members in the House of Representatives, and also from other right-wing extremists who were clearly opposed to his election as Speaker. So he essentially had to make compromises on 16 different occasions and give away parts of his power, his authority, in fact, even reducing it to the point where any individual member of the House of Representatives can call for a vote of confidence to expel the Speaker at any time and for any reason. So he's got a very tenuous speakership, a very razor-thin majority, and with the concerns about Santos, the liar who was elected from New York, whose resume would never pass a lie detector test, whether he's going to be recalled or they're going to have a special election or eject him is going to threaten that margin even more because Santos is one of McCarthy's supporters. So it's very tenuous. It's going to be a continuation of the division, the divided House division, the polarity that we've had in the past, Al, trying to get anything through the House of Representatives. And he had to provide significant committee appointments for members of the Freedom Caucus far outside their representation in the body. And at any time, this House of Cards could tumble, probably sooner rather than later.
Reggie, what do you think?
I think that I don't think he's gained any power at all. I think he's a paper tiger. I think that, as you have mentioned, he traded away all his authority, making side deals to be able to get the speakership. And I don't think he's a staunch supporter of Trump. I don't think he's ever been a true supporter of Trump. I think it's a marriage of convenience. McCarthy is the one back in 2016 who was overheard on an open mic saying that the Russians are paying off Trump and we're paying off a Republican congressman from California, Rohrabacher. And he had to walk that back. And Trump recently, during these negotiations for his speakership, Trump was asked, well, you're going to continue to support McCarthy? He said, well, we'll see what happens. So I think both of these politicians I think they're purely transactional. And I think that's why a lot of the Republicans, not just the Freedom Caucus, but the larger Republican body, I think the 200 that were initially supporting him only understood what they could get out of it and understood that they had a politician who would take the speakership who was totally manipulable and would bend to the will of the far right.
So what does that mean, Reggie and Youssef? Is there a lesson here or a lesson to not to for organizations like the Congressional Black Caucus when it seems in the case of this election to the speakership, the few controlled the many, the 20 holdouts, then it reduced to fewer than 20. And it seems they negotiated down to the last one to get him over the threshold to be selected as speaker. But they exerted a lot of flesh or claimed a lot of power in negotiating. What does that mean for the Black Caucus or other blocs within the overall legislature? What do you think, Youssef?
Well, I think you have to look at the bigger picture, Al. The majority of the Republicans who were running for the House of Representatives, number one, were election deniers, okay? And the majority of those were running from safe Republican districts. They weren't running in hotly contested purple districts that could have gone either way, Democratic or Republican. So the main body of the Republican Party is extremely conservative, okay, and extremely loyal to Trump. Now, some commentators have suggested that Trump took over the Republican Party. In truth, what he did was reveal the Republican Party, okay? Because these people have the same agenda that they've had for the 4 years prior to the Biden administration. Their priorities have not changed, and they intend to be as obstructionist or more, given the power that McCarthy has conceded to the Freedom Caucus, than they were in the previous under Trump's administration. So it's the Democrats control the Senate, the Republicans control the House, and it's going to be difficult to identify common issues that both Democrats and Republicans can agree on and pass into legislation, into policy.
Reg, your thoughts?
I think that a lot of the power of the few that is being wielded by the Republicans, I think that's bolstered by two things outside of the congressional body. I think the amount of dark money that's coming from right-wing interests that are supporting these candidates, that are affecting legislation by sending in their lobbyists. I think that power, and I think the fact that the Republicans have stacked the deck in the courts, not just on the Supreme Court, but on the federal bench, period, across the country. I think that gives them leverage to when there is to become an issue, there is a showdown, or things get in a deadlock. I think they have the courts to step in, as they've been doing, and side with the Republicans to be able to help them to win the day in terms of getting policy through.
So the question I ask is, what does it mean for Black political power? And are there lessons here for how we organize, mobilize, and leverage situations differently? I had in our previous conversations, Yusef, Burnell, once upon a time, Burnell Powell, Professor Dean Powell, from former dean of the South Carolina Law School, said that he hoped this administration, the Biden administration, would take on a Johnsonian aura, meaning be political and be, he didn't use this word ruthless, but be heavy-handed in pulling the troops together to make sure that there was a unified push to effect the progressive policy. And in saying that, he criticized the Democrats, the liberals, the progressives, for being too splintered, too divided. So the question becomes, again, is there a lesson for our side, I'll say that, on how we use power in a way that's still ethical and responsible, but doesn't run from the this idea that we can't do it because we might offend the Republicans. Yusef, what do you think?
Well, the Republicans in the House have created a committee to study the weaponization of the federal government. And they're going to be looking at Justice Department investigations, at Joe Biden's son, at the classified papers that have been discovered in the Penn Biden library. And these folks are very serious about their agenda. Now, within the minority party in the House, the Democratic Party, there are different coalitions. And you asked earlier what the impact is going to be on the Black Caucus or on Black political power. And I think that those Black and progressive representatives are going to have to choose widely which coalitions and which battles that they want to join in terms of policy and legislation during this session. They've got the White House and they've got the Senate, but there's going to have to be some work done across the aisle, and there's going to have to be common ground between Democrats in the Senate and in the House on which issues become priority issues. And if you're talking about proportional representation, the Congressional Black Caucus has always been limited in terms of their ability to play trump cards, no pun intended, but to assist in defining what the legislative priorities are in both houses. So a lot of it is going to be wait and see and stalemate.
Well, one of the other things I mentioned in the opening was the Biden administration's effort to tighten limits on deadly air pollution. We've got, and I shared with you an article from today, well, actually published January 6th in the New York Times, an article by Carol Davenport. And the article is entitled Biden Administration Moves to Tighten Limits on Deadly Air Pollution. And it says the Biden administration proposed to tighten limits on fine particulate matter, a deadly air pollutant that includes soot. And it would be the first time in more than a decade, the article says, that the federal government cracks down on a contaminant responsible for thousands of premature deaths every year. Fine particulate matter comes from smokestacks, construction, trucks, power plants, and other industrial activity. And it has a diameter of no more than 2.5 micrometers, 1/30th the width of a human hair, and can only become embedded in the lungs. And so therefore it's linked to heart attacks, stroke, and respiratory ailments. I'll read the next paragraph here and we'll talk about it. The draft rule by the EPA tightens the current limit, which has been in place since 2012, by as much as 25%. It reduces it by 25%. The administration estimates that it could prevent as many as 4,200 premature deaths annually, as well as 270,000 missed work days per year, and would result in up to $43 billion in net health and economic benefits by 2032. Yusef, the question of our people paying attention to and advocating strategies, policies that not only protect our personal and family and neighborhood health, but also position us to bring our voice to what the environment can and should be if it's healthy and its health synonymous with our health. What do you think, Yusef?
Well, I think we have to support it, Al. Just it's 5% science and it's 95% common sense. But at the same time, the reduction of 25% is incremental through the year 2032. So it's across the next 9 years. And the 25% reduction won't be realized until 2032. The reality is that poor people and disproportionately people of color live in industrial areas, live where there is a lot of environmental racism, pollution from sources such as the soot and the air pollution that is mentioned in this particular policy change. So we need to do it. The Trump administration ignored it because the rule requires review and incremental action every 8 years, and the Trump administration just ignored it completely. And so the Biden administration now has to compensate and make up for what didn't occur at the checkpoint during the Trump administration and hopefully get out in front of it.
Reggie, as a practicing journalist, have we paid enough attention to this quote unquote environmentalism issue? Do we as a community fully understand what the call for environmental stewardship is and what role we should play in it? Do we fully understand? Are we able to navigate our interest, to articulate our interest when it comes to the connection between environmentalism and how I'm living and feeling and breathing right now, right here? What do you think?
I think the one word answer is absolutely no. But to pick up on part of what Yusef was talking about as far as where the industrial plants are and these other places where they're located in low income and communities of color, that goes way back to the late 60s during the quote urban renewal period, when there was white flight and a lot of highways were built right through Black communities of color nationwide to allow the new suburbanites to be able to go downtown into the downtown areas of the urban centers of large cities to work and then escape without having to drive through the neighborhoods of color. So all the pollution that resulted from all of that traffic that goes right through the heart of many of these communities of color. That's one source of it. But to pick up on what you have said, a lot of that industrial development was built around those highways. You know, you exit such and such, you find such and such industry, and exit such and such, you find another industry. So that even amplified the amount of pollution. And I don't think that we are aware. I don't think that Black journalism is doing. I think Black journalism could certainly do more. I don't think a lot of people, everyday folks who get up and go to work every day, are cognizant, are aware of their environment, where pollution is concerned, and the source of the pollution, and the intensity of and the magnitude of the pollution. So I think there's more that certainly can be done in that area.
Yeah. The other reality, Al, and I support everything that Reggie said, is that environmental conservation is not without its costs. Whether it's energizing your home, whether it's shopping at the co-op, poor people don't have enough money to pay for a Costco membership, so they shop at the gas station supermarket. And when you're looking at purchasing a Tesla or purchasing a hoopty, there ain't a lot of wiggle room there. Okay, so it's poor people are saddled with the burden of trying to address environmentalism and become greater stewards. And many of the factors that have a negative impact in our community are outside of the control of individual households or apartments, and are part of the larger local, regional, and national policy, which is more reason why we have to support this. We don't have a choice because the environmental clock is getting closer and closer to midnight, and the scientists keep saying that unless we address some of the carbon dioxide issue, the global warming issue, the climate change issue, we're rapidly approaching the point of no return, and our children and our grandchildren are going to inherit insurmountable environmental challenges that they had absolutely nothing to do with creating. And that's not necessarily the greatest incentive to encourage them to put their arms around it and want to tackle it.
Al, may I add one more quick point to Yusuf's point? I have, earlier in my career, I worked as a sales manager in the retail automotive industry. And I just realized when Yusuf made that point about the hoopties and the Teslas, is another thing that's affecting pollution, air pollution in low-income communities, is the cars we drive, the cars we inherit. We getting the low end, we're getting the leftovers, we're getting the older cars, we're getting the used cars that are not as fuel efficient, not as pollution efficient as newer cars that many people in low income and dark communities just simply can't afford. Mm-hmm. So within the community, we get the gas guzzlers to get older cars that are putting out more pollution and just exacerbating the entire problem. Well,
brother, and if you own a Tesla, Reggie, there are no charging stations in the ghetto. Okay.
That's right.
So you got a problem. Well, so I want to sit here a little bit longer and talk about this question of environmental stewardship and the question of definition. How do we, Yusuf, begin to define or create a new narrative, a new definition of who we are, what our responsibilities are, what our accountabilities are to not only the environment, but to, as you said, Reggie, generations yet unborn? I think that we have kind of been conditioned to focus on the now and the survival aspect of now-ness, that we have been also simultaneously conditioned to not looking at long-term, multi-generational
kick it down the road.
Yeah. Challenges and opportunities. So what if we started changing that right now and right here? And then is there a way for us to create a discussion in our community about not just my son or my daughter and my son and daughter's sons and daughters, but 7 generations from now? How would that change our motivation, our action, and compel us to take more seriously the duty we have now for stewardship that protects the seventh generation. I'm just, sort of blue skying here, Yusef. What are your thoughts? And Reggie, what are your thoughts on the general topic?
Reggie, go ahead, bro.
I think that you hit the nail on the head, Al, when you mentioned the fact that so many people that live in communities of color are so involved in their own daily survival that they don't get a chance in many instances to lift up their heads and look around and understand what's going on outside their immediate circle. And I think that that's going to have to be a job of journalists. I think journalism can dig up and pull together those statistics and write about those statistics and look at the implications and ramifications of policies as they are continuing and what those results will be in those communities. But we have to communicate that to people who can do something about it. And those are our politicians. We have to communicate to them. We have to get them on the record. What can they do about it? Because I'm thinking, as we were discussing, another huge source of pollution in communities of color is the fact, I just did a piece, as a matter of fact, Al, I sent it to you. 1 out of 10 white Americans don't own an automobile. Nearly 30% of African Americans don't own an automobile. We disproportionately are riding the bus, and buses are disproportionately riding through communities of color, belching out more pollution than we can imagine. So one of the things we have to petition our politicians about is bringing electric and fuel efficient transportation to urban centers to cut down on the pollution.
So we're doing the right thing in using mass transit systems. That's a good thing for us. But the challenge is, how do we make sure that those systems are as efficient as possible, that they work for us, and that they, in a sense, are reflective of best practices in the space of environmentalism. Let me shift the discussion a little bit more now to, again, in the arena of our opening hot topics. We note that the Biden administration is saying it's going to invest $55 billion in Africa over the next 3 years. Any thoughts about that, Reggie?
Oh, absolutely. $55 billion does sound like a lot of money, but when you consider that there are 54 countries in Africa, the average country is getting roughly $1 billion. And not with the understanding that, the variety of sizes of those countries, some are very small, some are very large. But I think that the policy has more to do with the influence that China has on Africa, and China is buying up Africa and indebting Africa, putting Africa in debt, just like they have the United States. Actually, they're using our money. Since we're in debt to China, they're using our money to finance Africa. And I think a lot of that policy has to do with the United States competing with China and Africa, not just for political influence, but also for the natural resources. That Africa is the last frontier for the amount of natural resources, more natural resources in Africa than any other place on the planet. And I think that has a lot to do with the United States making this this investment. But I would like to see what that comes down to, because right now, I think 3 of the top 10 African countries right now, I think it's Ethiopia, Nigeria. I can't think of the third, but there are at least 3, Yemen. There are at least 3 African countries that are already getting nearly $1 billion each. Okay, which is a good thing. But I think it really comes down to competing with the Chinese and not necessarily having the best interests of Africa at heart. And I think it's also a political issue that Biden can bring out in 2024 and say, hey, not only am I looking out for my brothers and sisters who elected me, my people of color, but I'm also looking out for your ancestors over in Africa. I think it could be a good talking point and a good political issue. But I don't know. I'd like to see the fine points, and I'd like to see the language behind it and see what it's really intended to accomplish.
Brother Yusef, put yourself, if you would, for a minute in the frame of mind of a brother on the continent, anywhere, maybe Nigeria or maybe Kenya. And how does this story unfold to you? If you see yourself as an African, average African somewhere, anywhere, lay out what's happening, how it looks.
Three things, Al. Number one, the United States gives more money in foreign aid to Israel than it does to all 54 of those independent African nations that Reggie mentioned. Number one.
3.5 billion.
Yeah. And number two, well, this 55 billion is spread out over 3 years. So it's about $330 million apiece if it were proportionally allocated across all 54 countries. Number two, the United States has 83 military bases on the continent of Africa, trying to militarily protect those precious resources that go into telephones and automobiles and the aerospace and communications programs. And clearly, this $55 billion is going to be used to provide riot insurance or continued protection for those countries that, quote, have minerals that are in the best interest of Wall Street. So I don't know that this is going to be a philanthropic or egalitarian, infrastructure building, educational, medical upliftment for the continent of Africa. It's going to be the quiet form of colonialism and dependence that the Chinese are implementing on a major scale, as Reggie mentioned, buying up every square inch of the continent, and the United States to boot, because they own most of the uranium-rich land within the United States today. China has the rights on those properties, including in national parks, protected lands, where the United States government initiates leases within protected territories owned by the government. So it's just another form of riot insurance. Here's how we're going to continue to protect our military, our political, and our resource interests for those international corporations and for Wall Street.
Well, still, so I still want you and Reggie to put yourselves both in in what you would imagine will be the mental framework of, say, someone in Kenya and someone in Nigeria. Reggie, I'm going to assign you to Nigeria, and then Yusuf, you to Kenya, right?
Okay.
How does this look to you? How are your interests served or disserved? And you can decide where you are in the spectrum, say the class spectrum or the power spectrum inside that particular culture. But how do you look at, and what do you want your country to do? And then what do you expect your kinfolk, those who were taken, who now reside in the United States, to be doing to support your ability to grow, thrive, and to not be continually exploited, but to be at the bargaining table with, so Reggie, go first.
That's a good question. I think that if I'm just an average Joe, if I'm just an average working person, I don't expect or anticipate any benefit from it, because the money's the check is not going to show up in my mailbox from the United States. Okay, the money's going to go to the government, the money's going to go to the power elite, and they're going to decide how it's distributed. And a lot of it's going to line their pockets, unfortunately. A lot of these countries are not democratic. Some of these countries are, unfortunately, kleptocracies. So I'm not going to see. I don't anticipate.
Break that word down. That's a good one. What is it?
I don't anticipate as an average Joe. I don't anticipate.
Now, what's a kleptocracy?
What's that?
What's a kleptocracy?
A kleptomaniac. People who steal. People who take anything that's not nailed down for their own personal benefit. Okay. Russia is referred to as the largest kleptocracy in the world. Okay, because of the oligarchs and their relationship to Putin. But as an average Joe, I don't expect any benefit from it whatsoever. If I'm part of the power elite, if I'm wealthy and I'm connected to the government, and I have a immediately mutual beneficial relationship with the government, that I might be able to get something out of it. And on the other hand, I really don't know that there's much that my brethren in the United States who are of African descent can do for me. When I look at the condition of African Americans and see what's not being done for African Americans by our politicians, by our nonprofit institutions. I mean, they're doing a lot, But what they're not accomplishing is very clear in the statistics in terms of incarceration, in terms of illness, in terms of poverty.
Yusef, let me ask you to add to your assignment here the approach to this as a Pan-Africanist. So is there a Pan-Africanist position, attitude, approach, analysis that can be elevated in this discussion?
Well, I think that education is very important now. I think we need to try and prevent these funds through our legislative representatives in Congress from winding up in the pockets of the multinational corporations. And I agree with Reggie. As an individual citizen of Kenya, I'm going to realize no value-added benefit from this investment because it's not going to improve my child's school, the quality of the water or the air that we breathe, or the medical facilities that we have access to, or the technology that is in our village or in our community. I think that we need to hold our elected representatives in Congress accountable for how the funds that are, allocated, our tax dollars that go into Africa and that go anywhere around the world for that matter, because so many of them are given. I thought it was interesting that Israel had a request for a certain amount and Congress doubled the amount that they were requesting. Okay, doubled it. Didn't say, okay, here's the 450 billion that you want, here's 900 billion. And I think we need to hold countries and governments responsible and accountable for the use that they put the money that we give them to. Okay, so that it's not just constantly a handout or charity, or we're waiting for a crisis or a national emergency to send in a few boxes of Wheaties and some flour and sugar. It's what are we doing to help increase their self-determination and to build up the foundation of the quality of life in their communities. And I think we have every right to ask Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith and the rest of our representatives in Congress and in the Senate to account to us for what they're doing and for where that money is going. I mean, I think it's important that funds go to the Ukraine to help protect them, but that's only a drop in the bucket in terms of what we allocate around the world. And it starts with education. People need to understand that that's their tax dollars that are going to support these despots and these other crazies under the guise of democracy.
Yusef, let me do this. Something we did yesterday on the program that worked well. I want to start it with all the programs. Close each program with asking one of our guests to take a 2-minute stroll down their own genealogy. What's important to me is that we always, in a sense, reflect and share and establish the credential from which we speak. And so I wanted, though you've done this before, take a minute, if you would, 2 or 3, we can go over if we need to talk about who is Yusef Mjini and whose shoulders are you standing on, and what's the vision, what's the mission that you have undertaken that represents your life. Yusef?
I'm going to have to talk fast. Let me try this.
Okay.
My great-grandfather was one of the 259 African Americans in the state of Minnesota when the Civil War broke out, Noah Anderson. And he was part of the group of more than half of the African American community who were part of the first state, Minnesota, to commit troops to Lincoln to go back down south to free the slaves. My great uncle, Frederick Lamar McGee, was the first African American attorney in Minnesota and in 2 other states. He was also the first Black attorney who was admitted to practice before the Minnesota Supreme Court. My grandfather was the pro bono attorney for the St. Paul NAACP, and Fred McGee, who I mentioned, my great uncle, was credited by Du Bois as being the person who came up with the idea for the Niagara Movement, which morphed into the NAACP. 1905 was the Niagara Movement. He also became a Catholic and was he and Samuel Hardy were the 2 founders of St. Peter Claver African American Catholic Church in St. Paul. My
That you're a
grandfather
member
was,
of now, right? You're still a member there.
yes, sir, the
Mhm.
family. My grandfather was the pro bono, on my father's side, was the pro bono attorney for the St. Paul NAACP. And that work cost him his life back in the 1930s. And the Ramsey County Bar Association took out a quarter-page ad in the old St. Paul Pioneer, commending him for committing his life to service to the Negro community in St. Paul. My birth certificate says I'm colored. My parents too. My baptismal certificate says I'm a Negro. My diploma from St. Peter Claver says I'm black. My high school diploma says I'm Afro-American. My first degree says African-American. And my passport says I'm American. So if I'm a bit schizophrenic, you have to understand that I come by it honestly, because I've got 7 different pieces of legal definitions of what my government identification is. My mother was a senior clerk typist in the public school system for 38 years. My father played in the Negro Leagues, ran on the Great Northern and Canadian Pacific Railroads, and operated his own independent black business in downtown St. Paul. Shoe repair, dry cleaning, leather work. He did all the leather work for all of the wrestlers, Vern Gagne and Hulk Hogan and all of those people. And my grandmother was the first woman and the youngest president of the St. Paul Urban League, and the family has been involved in the NAACP and the Urban League all of my life, which is why I am the first vice president of the Minnesota Dakota Area Conference of the NAACP, and for the past 10, 12 years have been a member of the executive committee, first vice president of the St. Paul NAACP. Kuumba is one of the 7 principles of blackness that we celebrate during Kwanzaa. My favorite is Kuumba, Kuumba. On the surface, it means creativity. Beneath the surface, it means that each of us has a responsibility to leave our community more beautiful than it was when we inherited it and were born into it. So I consider myself a servant leader, and I'm just trying to carry, some of us have to carry a little more than our share of the load to make up for those who are not doing same. So I'm a community volunteer, been with the same black woman for 53 years. I talk in my sleep, so I have to practice clean living or I might not wake up in the morning. Have 2 beautiful children, and am at peace with myself, Hal. So, and you and I go back 50 years, so we know one another like family.
Absolutely.
And that's why I'm happy to have an invitation to appear on Conversations with Al McFarlane, and to make a small contribution to informing people in the listening and viewing audience. And that's who I am.
Well, Brother Yusuf and Dougal Yusuf and Jeannie, that I call a mic drop. Thank you so much. And with that, we close the show. Brother Reggie Taylor, thank you. And so you know what the script is for next time.
Absolutely.
We'll invite you to tell the story as well. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Do the thing. Go to YouTube, Insight News, and subscribe, and tell everybody you know. Tell everybody.
Please.
Let's go talk. Be part of The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.